I had barely gotten the words. Henry was my best friend out of my mouth when his dad launched himself across the church and knocked me clean off the podium. No joke. 1 second I was standing there holding my little stack of note cards, trying not to completely fall apart during my best friend's funeral, and the next my back slammed into the front pew so hard it rattled every bone in my body. My cards scattered across the polished wood floor while people screamed, chairs scraped, and somebody dropped a hymnal that hit the ground with a loud crack. "You don't get to talk about Henry," he yelled, his face inches from mine. "You killed my son." I literally froze. Not because he was hitting me, although he absolutely was, but because for one stupid second my brain thought maybe I had heard him wrong. Then another punch landed. "You hear me?" he shouted. 2 ushers finally grabbed him from behind and dragged him backward while he fought against them like they were trying to arrest him. His wife stood beside the casket, shaking so badly she could barely point at me. "Murderer," she whispered. It wasn't even loud, but somehow everyone heard it. Henry's older brother stepped forward next. He didn't yell. Somehow that made it worse. "We know you gave him the pills," he said coldly. "We know you were there that night. We know you let him die." I opened my mouth. What? That's not. The funeral director gently touched my shoulder. "I think," he said quietly, "you should leave before someone calls the police." The police. At my best friend's funeral. I looked around the sanctuary, hoping honestly, begging with my eyes that somebody would say this was insane. Nobody did. These were people I'd known my whole life. My 3rd grade teacher, the guy who coached Little League, neighbors who used to wave every morning while grabbing their mail. Every single face looked back at me like I was something rotten. Then I saw my parents. 3 rows back. My mom had tears running down her face. My dad stared at the floor. Neither one of them moved. Neither one of them said a word. So I picked up exactly one of my note cards, the one closest to my shoe, and walked out. The church doors shut behind me with a heavy thud that echoed through the parking lot. I just stood there. I remember looking at Henry's truck sitting across the lot, except it wasn't Henry's truck anymore. He wasn't ever driving it again. That realization hit harder than the punches. I got in my car and drove home without turning on the radio. Silence somehow felt louder. The next morning, things got worse. Way worse. Somebody had spray painted one word across both driver's side doors. Disgusting. Big black letters. You couldn't miss them. I stood there staring at it with my coffee still in my hand until it went cold. I actually laughed once. Not because it was funny, because my brain didn't know what else to do. "Seriously?" I muttered. "We're doing this now?" Apparently. Yeah, we were. I drove straight to the coffee shop where I'd worked for almost 4 years. I figured maybe keeping busy would help me survive the day, and never made it inside. My manager was already waiting outside. She looked exhausted. "I am so sorry," she said. The second people start a sentence like that, your stomach already knows what's coming. "You can't come back." "What?" "The customers," she sighed, "they're threatening to boycott us." "I didn't do anything." "I know." She hesitated. I want to believe that. That one hurt. More than I expected. She handed me my final paycheck. "We just can't survive this." I wanted to argue. Instead, I shoved the envelope into my pocket, nodded once, and walked back to my car. By that afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing, except nobody was actually calling me. Just messages. Most of them I never opened. A few previews were enough. "You should be in prison." "Confess already, monster." One simply read, "Why are you still alive?" I turned the phone off. A couple hours later, I drove to my girlfriend Emily's house. At least, I thought I still had a girlfriend. My overnight bag sat neatly beside her front porch. So did 2 boxes. One had my hoodie folded inside. The other had my toothbrush sitting on top like some kind of cruel little joke. There was a note. 3 words. "Don't contact me." No signature. Didn't need one. I knocked anyway. Nothing. "Emily?" Silence. "I wasn't there," I said through the closed door. "I swear, I wasn't even—" No answer. The porch light clicked off. That was my answer. I loaded everything into my trunk and sat behind a steering wheel for almost 20 minutes without starting the engine. It felt weird how fast a life could disappear. 48 hours earlier, I'd had a best friend, a job, a girlfriend, a hometown. Now, people looked at me like I belonged behind bars. I kept trying to tell myself this had to blow over. Someone would realize they had the facts wrong. Somebody would ask questions. right? Instead, every person I tried explaining things to gave me the exact same look. That look that says, "You're lying." Eventually, I stopped trying. Not because I was guilty, because it didn't matter anymore. Nobody was listening. About a week later, my parents asked me to come over for coffee. That wasn't unusual. The silence waiting for me when I walked through the front door was, Mom was already sitting at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. Dad stood by the window looking out into the backyard like the grass had suddenly become the most interesting thing he'd ever seen. Nobody smiled. Nobody even said hello. Mom finally cleared her throat. "We've been thinking." I almost laughed. "Thinking now? Really?" Dad spoke without turning around. "You should leave town." I blinked. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Just for a while." "A while?" "Until everything settles down." I looked back and forth between them. They weren't angry. They weren't accusing me. They just looked tired, like they wanted this whole thing to disappear. I waited for the part where they defended me. It never came. "You know I didn't do this," I said quietly. Neither one answered. "I didn't give Henry pills." Silence. I wasn't with him that night. Mom looked down at her coffee. Dad rubbed the bridge of his nose. "You'll be safer somewhere else," he finally said. Safer, not innocent, not believed. Safer. That single word sat heavier than anything else they'd said. I remember staring at my father and thinking, just ask me. Ask if I did it. Give me one chance to answer. He never did. 2 days later, I packed everything that still fit into my car, which, honestly, wasn't much anymore. Some clothes, a lamp, a few books, an old coffee maker. Henry had once joked that I owned more books than furniture. Looking back, he wasn't wrong. Mom hugged me before I left. She cried into my shoulder. Dad shook my hand. Actually shook my hand, like I was some coworker transferring to another office. Then I got in my car and drove. No destination, no plan. Just away. Hours passed. Highways blurred together. Radio stations faded in and out. At some point, I crossed into a city where nobody knew my name. Nobody knew Henry. Nobody stared. Nobody whispered. That alone felt strange. I found a warehouse hiring overnight workers. The supervisor looked at my application for maybe 15 seconds. "You lift 50 pounds? Yeah. You show up on time? Yeah. Good enough." He handed me a badge. That was my interview. I almost cried in the parking lot afterward. Not because I loved warehouse work, because for the first time in weeks, somebody looked at me without already deciding who I was. Life settled into something that barely qualified as living. Work, sleep, microwave dinners, repeat. People there were nice enough. A guy named Marcus always complained about the vending machines. "This place has the worst chips in America, every single shift, without fail." A woman named Denise kept trying to convince everyone to join her fantasy football league even though half of us barely watched football. Normal conversations, normal people, normal problems. I wanted to join in. Instead, I kept everyone at arm's length. When someone asked where I grew up, I moved around. When someone asked if I had family, they're back home. When someone asked why I'd moved, I just needed a fresh start. Technically true, just missing about 1,000 details. Because how exactly do you explain? My best friend died and an entire town believes I murdered him. That's not exactly great small talk over lunch. 5 years passed. Not quickly. People always say time flies. I don't think it does. Not after something like that. It crawls. You just slowly get better at carrying the weight. The nightmares came less often. Henry's face stopped appearing in every crowd. The anger faded. The loneliness didn't. Sometimes I'd see 2 friends laughing outside a restaurant and catch myself wondering what Henry would have said. Usually something sarcastic. He had this way of making everything sound ridiculous. If I bought expensive coffee, he'd grin and say, "Congratulations, you paid $8 for bean water." If I got a haircut, "You look exactly the same." "Thanks. I wasn't complimenting you." Little things, stupid things. Those were somehow the memories that stayed. Then last month, everything changed. I was moving apartments. Again, nothing dramatic. Just found somewhere slightly cheaper. My living room looked like a cardboard maze. Books stacked everywhere. Kitchen packed. Furniture half disassembled. I grabbed an old box labeled books, lifted it onto the floor, and one paperback slipped loose. It hit the hardwood with a soft smack. A worn poetry collection. I recognized it instantly. Henry had given it to me for my birthday the year before he died. "Expand your horizons," he'd joked. "You know I don't read poetry?" Exactly. I remembered laughing. I also remembered putting the book on my shelf and never opening it. Not once. I bent down to pick it up. That's when something slid from between the pages. A small cream-colored envelope. It landed face up, my name, written across the front. Henry's handwriting. I swear my heart stopped. Just for a second. I slowly picked it up. Ran my thumb over the ink. No mistake, it was his. The envelope had yellowed a little with age. The flap had never been opened. I just stared at it. 5 years. 5 entire years this thing had been sitting 10 feet away from me. I carefully broke the seal. Inside were several folded pages. The first line made every hair on my arms stand up. The letter was dated 3 days before Henry died. I sat down right there on the apartment floor. Boxes everywhere. Tape dispenser beside my knee. Moving blanket half unfolded. Nothing else in the room mattered anymore. I unfolded the first page. The paper trembled in my hands. Then I started reading. "If you're reading this," it began, "something happened to me, and you need to know the truth." I literally stopped breathing. I read that sentence again, then again. Something happened to me. Not, if I die, not, if something goes wrong. Something happened, like he'd already expected it, like he knew. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Henry wrote that he'd been volunteering at a long-term care facility. That part surprised me. He'd never mentioned it. Apparently, he'd become close with one of the patients, a man named Joseph. Joseph had been paralyzed for 20 years after a hit-and-run accident. Henry described helping with physical therapy sessions, talking to him, listening to his stories. Then came the part that made him suspicious. Joseph remembered every detail of the night he'd been hit. A car jumped the curb. Several people got out. They looked at him lying there. Then they got back into the car and drove away, leaving him screaming for help. I felt my stomach twist as I kept reading. Henry wrote that something about Joseph's story wouldn't leave him alone. It reminded him of a night from when we were kids. One night, one memory. Both of our parents had gone out together, all 4 of them. When they finally came home, they looked terrified. I remember that. I'd almost forgotten it until that exact moment. Henry remembered it too. More importantly, he hadn't let it go. The next paragraph was only 1 sentence long. I confronted them. I stared at those 3 words for what felt like forever. Then I turned the page. I turned the page with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I confronted them, Henry had written. All 4 of them. My chest tightened. I already knew who he meant. His parents, my parents. The 4 adults who had practically raised us together. The people we trusted our entire lives. Henry wrote that he hadn't accused them right away. He'd simply asked questions. Little things at first. Why Joseph's story sounded so familiar. Why they'd acted so strangely that night when we were kids. Why everyone suddenly wanted to change the subject whenever he brought it up. At first they denied everything. Then one of them broke. Henry never said which one. He only wrote. Once one person admitted it, the rest couldn't keep lying. I stopped reading. Just for a second. I looked around my apartment like somehow the walls were going to tell me this wasn't real. Nothing moved. The only sound was my refrigerator humming in the next room. I looked back down. Henry wrote that 20 years earlier, all 4 parents had gone out together after work. They'd been laughing, talking, driving home late. His father had been behind the wheel. Then, the car jumped the curb. Joseph never had a chance. They all got out, saw him lying there, broken, still alive, still begging for help. Henry wrote that panic took over. His parents convinced everyone they had to leave before anyone recognized them. It'll destroy our careers. It'll ruin our families. We'll all go to prison. So they left. Just left. Joseph survived, but barely. He spent the next 20 years in a wheelchair. No justice, no compensation, no apology, nothing. I leaned against the wall and covered my mouth. All those years, all those holidays, birthday parties, cookouts, camping trips. The adults smiled, laughed, shared meals together, while one man spent 2 decades paying for their decision. I kept reading. Henry said he couldn't accept it. He told them they had to go to the police. They had to confess. They had to tell Joseph the truth. Instead, they begged him not to. They said they were protecting everyone, Henry wrote. They even asked me not to tell you. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. They said you didn't deserve to carry this. I actually laughed. One short, bitter laugh. Didn't deserve to carry it. Instead, they let me carry something even worse. They let an entire town believe I'd killed my best friend. Henry explained that he'd agreed not to tell me immediately because he wanted time to figure out what to do. He thought maybe he could convince them to come forward on their own. He still believed they would eventually do the right thing. Then the letter changed. Completely. The handwriting became messier, like he'd been writing faster. Or maybe, like he'd been scared. Strange things have been happening. That was the first sentence. My brakes failed on the highway. He explained that his car suddenly lost braking power while driving. Somehow he managed to stop without crashing. The mechanic couldn't find anything wrong. A few days later, someone followed him home. Not once, twice. He'd pull into a parking lot, the same car would pull in. He'd leave, they'd leave. Eventually, they'd disappear before he could get a license plate. Then came the phone calls. Middle of the night, always after midnight. He'd answer, nothing. Just breathing, slow, steady, waiting, no words, no threats. Just enough to let him know someone was there. I don't know if I'm paranoid, he wrote, or if someone's trying to scare me into staying quiet. I felt goosebumps race up my arms, because suddenly, his death didn't feel random anymore. The next paragraph was why he'd hidden the letter. I decided to leave this where only you might eventually find it. He explained why he'd chosen the poetry book. Because he knew me, he knew I'd thank him for the gift. Put it on a shelf. Forget about it, he was right. 5 years. The letter had waited 5 years. Then I reached the final page, the last paragraph. The words that completely shattered whatever was left of me. If something happens to me. I stopped breathing again. And it looks like an accident. I swallowed. Or an overdose. I felt sick. You need to know I've never touched that stuff in my life. I stared at the sentence until the words blurred together. Henry continued. My parents have access to prescription medications do their work. He never directly accused them. Not once. He simply wrote. I wouldn't put it past them if they felt trapped. That somehow made it even worse. No dramatic accusations. No certainty. Just fear. Real fear. Then came the last lines. I hope you never have to read this. If you are reading it. I'm sorry. I won't be here to fight this battle. The letter ended there. No signature, just Henry. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes. Hours. It honestly could have been either. The afternoon sunlight slowly moved across the hardwood floor until it reached the edge of the pages in front of me. I never noticed. My entire life had just split into 2 versions. The version before I opened that envelope, and the version after. Suddenly, everything made sense. Why Henry's father attacked me before I'd even finished speaking. Why his mother whispered murderer. Why his brother sounded so certain. Someone had convinced them I supplied the drugs. Someone had given them a target for their grief. Me. It also explained something I'd spent 5 years trying not to think about. My parents. The way my father couldn't meet my eyes. The way my mother cried without defending me. The way neither of them ever asked whether I was innocent. Back then, I thought maybe they were overwhelmed. Maybe they didn't know what to believe. Now, I wasn't so sure. Maybe they already knew there was a secret so much bigger than my ruined reputation that protecting it had become more important than protecting their own son. That realization hurt more than losing my job, more than Emily leaving, more than the spray paint, more than every hateful message I'd ever received. Because strangers owed me nothing. My parents did. Henry had spent his final days trying to do the right thing, trying to force 4 guilty adults to face what they'd done. Instead, he ended up dead. And I lost 5 years of my life believing the world had simply decided to hate me. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases, not because I wanted to put it away, because it suddenly felt priceless. The last thing my best friend had ever given me wasn't the poetry book. It was the truth. A truth he protected until his final days because he believed I'd know what to do when the time came. I looked at the stack of moving boxes around my apartment. 5 years earlier, I'd driven into this city with nothing but a few books, some clothes, and a reputation I couldn't escape. Now I was sitting on the floor holding something that could explain everything. It couldn't give Henry back. It couldn't erase Joseph's suffering. It couldn't return the years I lost. But for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't asking myself why my life had fallen apart. I finally knew. The question waiting in front of me now was much harder. Henry had carried the truth until it killed him. Now it was my turn to decide what happened next.